This is Glenn Hughes, the voice of rock, and you're listening to Music Mania.
You ready for some screaming heavy metal? We rock! But the evil that men do, then John, we gonna bang your head!
You are now listening to the Music Mania podcast, brought to you by CD Warehouse in Gladstone, the #1 hard rock podcast in the Midwest, featuring hard-hitting interviews with rock's living legends. And now, here's your host, Clint Switzer.
Well, it's summertime and the living is anything but easy here on the Music Mania podcast, and we have a big show for you today as I'm going one-on-one with Mitch Lafon, yes, the host of Rock Talk with Mitch Lafon on Westwood One. Of course, you can check that out on iTunes, Apple Podcasts. One of the greatest, one of the best interviewers, one of the best rock journalists, one of the most respected guys in the business. Mitch Lafon is going to be joining us to talk about a myriad of things. You know, when I get other interviewers on this show, we tend to just talk music and talk about our experiences and passion and how it came to be. We're going to ask him about his first interview at age 11 with Gene Simmons and on into his latest show, which features members of Collective Soul, Lit, and Poison. You can follow him on Twitter at Mitch Lafon, and you can follow us on Twitter at MusicMania_show. I'll tell you, summer concert season is off and running, and I hit the ground running myself this past Memorial Day weekend. I didn't get a lot of fun and sun on the lake or anything like that because I was at two concerts. I did do Poison and Cheap Trick on Friday night, which you can read my review of that show on the website, musicmaniapodcast.com. But in short, it was a good set from Poison, maybe a little scaled down stage-wise. The venue was a bit ambitious, probably got 6,000 or 7,000 in there out of a venue that seats 18, so they had the whole upper level blocked off for this show. And Poison, really, they cut two songs out of the set that they started the tour with. I Won't Forget You and Cry Tough were both absent, and for diehard fans, you know, people that love going to see Poison year after year, you want to see a set list change, and you really didn't get that on this tour, which I think is the most disappointing thing. Other than that, Bret Michaels still doing a great job. He's still, you know, the ringleader of Poison, and there's no doubt about that, which is why he does so much solo touring and so much branding of his own, aside from Poison, which members of the band, you know, have kind of taken exception with over the years. But it's good to see Poison back. They're kind of a staple for summer for me. I first saw them on the reunion tour back in 1999. So kind of a cool thing for me as I went to that show, spending my last $20 as a 15-year-old kid for a lawn seat at Sandstone Amphitheater in Kansas City. They were touring with Rat and Great White and LA Guns. And to fast forward to now, to see him and to be on the band's list, to get into the show, and it's just kind of surreal. Say what you want about Poison, but me seeing that show back in 99 really kind of started a rock and roll journey for me, and sure, my tastes have evolved since then, but I still have fun at Poison shows, and I'll make no bones about it, and this is a fun tour, and they always bring it, and it's great to see the four original members of Poison, and CeCe DeVille, and Bret Michaels, Bobby Dahl, and Ricky Rocket on stage together, and the tour's going well. Be sure to catch this if you see it, and then the next day, I saw Alabama, yes, Country Superstars, Alabama. I saw them down at the Ozarks Amphitheater, which is a fantastic venue. So I got two big shows this weekend. It's just the start of many summer concerts for me. I've got Bryan Adams coming up, Tom Kiefer from Cinderella. I know I've got Bush on the horizon. Shows like Foreigner and Whitesnake coming up, Weezer and Alice Cooper, and there's many more. It's going to be a fun summer. We're going to talk to Mitch about his concert schedule for the summer. Always busy. He is a busy guy. He is the foremost authority when it comes to all things hard rock music, and I would say go to him, listen to his podcast, check out everything he does because, you know, he's real. He's a fan. He's got the passion for it, and beyond being a fan now, he takes his job very seriously as a journalist, and it's something that I aspire to get to that level where he's at, where a lot of his interviews are picked up by sites like Blabbermouth. And before I bring you the interview with Mitch Lafon, I've got to tell you about our sponsors, CD Warehouse in Gladstone, Missouri. For over 22 years, a staple of the Northland when it comes to music. I've bought 95% of the music I still own today from CD Warehouse. Buy, sell, and trade CDs, DVDs, vinyl, and more. Guys, check out CD Warehouse in Gladstone, the owner Randy Ringer. Mention Music Mania, and he will give you a discount, or it's on us. CD Warehouse in Gladstone, a staple for over 22 years. I'll tell you what, Mitch, we are so excited to have you on the Music Mania podcast here. We've been talking a lot about the summer concert season. It's all kind of kicking off, and I know you're out there and you're at as many shows as anyone. We just had Poison roll through here in Kansas City on Friday. What shows have you seen so far, and what do you have coming up, my man?
Okay, so what I've seen in the last little bit has been quite a bit. I've seen Joe Satriani, the M3 Festival, George Thorogood, Sons of Apollo. What else? I've got coming up. I've got a ton coming out. I saw Foreigner, by the way. I saw the Judas Priest tour when it came by, Black Star Riders, which I like. Coming up in June, starting tomorrow, I've got Slayer with Anthrax, and then I've got Foreigner with Whitesnake. I've got Poison with Cheap Trick. I've got George Thorogood again. I've got Sebastian Bach. I've got Tesla with Joan Jett and Styx. I've got REO Speedwagon. What else is coming up? The Dead Daisies, of course, later this summer is coming up. Just an incredible Heavy Montreal is coming up in July. So just a lot of stuff coming up. The Gen X tour with Lit and Buck Cherry. So I'm gonna be moving around.
You do. You got. That's a pretty busy summer. I thought mine was busy, but my goodness, that's crazy. And I want to go back because it's been a few weeks now. But you had some comments on the Bon Jovi tour that rolled in. I think you went to both nights and had some comments about the set list and stuff. Now, a lot of people have looked at this. They went into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame only about a month or so ago. What did you see from the shows and kind of the difference between maybe some of the newer material and some of the older stuff?
Well, I've been a Bon Jovi fan since, Slippery and even Fahrenheit, and there was a certain something about those shows back then. There was an energy, there was an exuberance. The set list had a lot of rock, and the rock songs, of course, they were great songs. Born to Be My Baby and You Give Love a Bad Name. I mean, these are undeniable hits. And the first night in Montreal, in fact, both nights they played some of the older stuff. Let me rephrase that: the newer stuff, I should say. And when they played the newer stuff, the fans just sat down. They just sat down. And, when they played You Give Love a Bad Name and Living on a Prayer, people were standing up, they were cheering, they were clapping, they were singing along, and then they would play whatever one of the new songs is called, and they would just sit down. And it was very strange for me because Montreal has always been a super Bon Jovi town. When Bon Jovi in the early 2000s were doing one night in places, they were doing 3 in Montreal. When they were doing 2-hour shows in Chicago, they were doing 3-hour shows. I mean, going to a Bon Jovi show in Montreal, you always got 27 songs, 28 songs, 30 songs even on one occasion. And it was just strange to see people sitting down and just going, can we get to the next song? I hadn't seen that before. Now, the second night, they changed it around. They threw in a few more of the older ones. We got Runaway and we got These Days or whatever. And it was a much, much better show. And traditionally, they've been better in Montreal on the second nights. The first night always seems to be, well, here's the standard tour set list. And the second night always seems to be, okay, you crazies deserve something different. And they've done that for 30 years, which is amazing. And the second night was fantastic. First night was a little bit, sleep-inducing, but what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do?
That's a good word for it. And, it kind of showed in the performance. I thought even at some of the Hall of Fame induction and stuff like that. But I want to get into this with you because Mitch, you've been doing this a long time. You do a tremendous podcast, and I want to urge everyone to subscribe to that on iTunes. Rock Talk with Mitch Lafon or One on One with Mitch Lafon. It's great. You've been doing this so long.
One on One is gone, but we are now Rock Talk. Yeah, so please subscribe to that, and it's all over the place. You can even go to Amazon Alexa and say Mitch Lafon, and it'll pop up.
That's scary in a way, but I kind of like it. I'm gonna have to try that. And but we're going on one right now, so we're resurrecting it for one day at least, right?
One episode, right?
And
like
Mitch, you've been doing this for a long time, and I remember I read a story, and I think that it was something you had posted on social media about doing your first interview at age 11. And I want just talk about, because I know for me that the passion for music has always been there, and I didn't know exactly how to get that out. But when I realized I couldn't play an instrument or sing, I realized, hey, I could interview musicians, I could do concert reviews, and that was kind of my way in. Is that kind of how it hit for you? And your first interview, I think, was with Gene Simmons at age 11. How did that come about? And just talk about your entry into the business, so to speak.
Well, that is true. I have absolutely no talent, zero musical talent. I tried. I tried guitar, wanted to be Ace Frehley, realized that was not going to happen, and then I figured, well, it's not that hard to just hit things, so I tried drumming. And then then of course I tried drumming when Creatures of the Night came out, and I tried to follow along to that, and I went, yeah, it's not going to work either. So I do the interview thing. But when I was 11 years old, back in 1980, I have always had a very high level of English. I had been tested as having university level English and so on and so forth back in when I was 10. So I pulled out the Kiss record, which was, I guess, Dynasty at the time, and on the back of it they had the contact for Ocoin Management, or maybe it might have been an earlier record, but I pulled out a record and said Ocoin Management. So I called the operator, because back then there was no Google. You would actually have to phone the operator of the local city and say, I need the phone number for whatever, and I did, and they gave me the phone number. And I phoned the office, and I had very good English, and I said to the lady in a very, blah, 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 I would like to have an interview, and I sounded very mature and very old, and they said, yes, that's fine. And they said, would you like to interview Paul Stanley? And I said, okay, that works for me. And I went and told my mom, and I said, can we drive from Montreal to New York, because I've got this Paul Stanley interview? And she was like, what? I said, no, believe me, I do. And then they phoned back, and they said, I forget if it was a couple of days later or a couple of weeks later, but they phoned back and they said, oh, we're so sorry, Paul has canceled, or Paul is unable to do it. And I was like, oh, fuck. And they said, well, how about if you interview Gene Simmons, would that be suitable? And I was like, no, yeah, I'm disappointed, but sure, I'll take that. And so I did, and my mom, bless her soul, because I've criticized her many times for other things, but she drove me down. She drove me down to New York, and that's like, it's a 7.5, 8 hour drive. I'm not sure many parents would indulge their 11-year-old's whim to drive 8 hours to go interview somebody in the middle of summer, June 9th, 1980, but she did, and we had thought, well, it's probably going to be very strange if I show up and interview him. Why don't you interview him? And because she was working for Denmark's radio and CBC, Canadian Broadcasting, at the time, and she did, and I prepped her. I gave her all the questions. I did all the research, which I still do to this day, and she did 15, 20 minutes with him, and you can find it on YouTube, because I put it on YouTube. I mean, obviously the audio quality from 1980 is not as it is today, but you can still hear it. And at the end of it, she said, oh, my son would like to ask you a few questions. And Gene, always being very, very benevolent and very nice. I mean, his public persona is the demon. But when you get, the charity work and all that, he said, sure. And I got 8 minutes with him. And I asked him a bunch of questions, and he was exceptionally surprised, if you listen to the tape, of, first of all, the maturity level of the questions and the follow-up. And he tried to say, well, if Santa Claus came down the chimney and you figured it was just your uncle, and I was just like, yeah, but still. And and it turned out great, and it sort of created a cachet, because somewhere around 93 or 94, Kiss Online got started, and I had submitted the interview to the site, and they posted it, and it got talked about in Kiss news groups and stuff. And I remember sitting in a studio with Tracy Guns, and he looked at me and he goes, you're the Kiss guy. I was like, what? He goes, you're the one who interviewed Gene. And I was like, yeah. And that sort of helped build the reputation, and it was almost like, the shiny new toy. He's the dude who interviewed Gene when he was 11, and it led to working for Brave Words magazine, and it led to all this stuff, and Brave Words led to this, and this led to Chris Jericho, and Chris Jericho led to what Westwood One, and so that was sort of the turning point to all of this, where I did university, but not in broadcasting or anything, and it led to this very strange and exciting career, and it's been very, very fun. So yeah, it's a true story. It's a great story. It's a turning point. It's you can't beat it. It is what it is. It's great.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you talk about being on part of the Jericho Network on Westwood One.
So it's on Westwood One, and then of course Google Play, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Alexa, and the rest of those places.
And on this latest episode, Mitch, you've got Collective Soul, Lit, and Poison members from each one. Great stuff. Just listen to it here. I think you had Ricky Rocket and Will, the drummer Will from Collective Soul. Talk about this latest episode. It's up now. Great stuff as always. Bringing it, and I always love putting multiple ones. I tend to usually do one guest per interview, and then I realize I have a 32-minute podcast here. It's good to load them up. You get the several guests. People can hear the different ones they want to hear. I think that's awesome. Great new episode, and they can find that right now. It's up and ready to go. Right.
Yeah, it is. It came out on Monday. So no, it's I've always wanted to get it down to two guests and just leave it at that. But the problem is that I do so many interviews. In fact, we're sitting here at the end of May, and I've almost essentially finished all my interviews for June. And you have to try to keep them fresh, and you have to try to keep them relevant. And it's silly to have an interview done in May that you're going to run, a week before July. So I had no choice but to start doing these 3 at a time things, and I like it now. It's long to put together, but if you tune into the show and you don't like Collective Soul, and there's only Collective Soul there, you'll probably turn it off. Really come to it now, and you're a Poison fan. Well, you might say, hey, you know what? Collective Soul, they had that song Shine. Let me see what this guy has to say. And you might give it a shot. And then, with Lit, which is not musically in terms of style, not that very different than Poison, you might say, hey, you know what? And you might be compelled to listen to some shows that you might just, if you're not a fan, so it gives the fan a chance to discover and check out people that they may not discover and check out necessarily. So I like doing that, and what I also like doing these days is I like getting a co-host, a special guest if you want. And on this one we had Adam Hamilton, who used to be in LA Guns, and of course if you listen to it, he tells the stories of how he's on the last Poison record. He's the guy who does all the hand claps, which I think is a funny story. And he talks about how he was partying with Cece and Steve Lukather and all that would come over, and it was like a drug-fueled haze for a couple of years, and I think that's interesting. And so I think it adds color, much like when you're watching football or hockey, there's a color guy, a color commentator. I think it adds a little bit of life to the interview rather than, well, here's Ricky, okay, let's go, and oh, here's Will, okay, let's go. But like, here's a guy who knows these guys, who's toured with these guys, and he's going to add a little bit of color to it. And I think it's a fun concept. And my choices are either don't accept some interviews, don't accept Will and don't accept Jeremy Popoff and only do Ricky, but then maybe lose potential listeners. I got all kinds of alternative press on the Collective Soul interview, which I don't normally get because I don't normally do alternative music, and so it's beneficial and it's fun, and it's necessity too, because I can't run this Ricky Rocket episode on July 1st when the tour is already over, so you have to pump it out.
Absolutely. We got Ricky Rocket coming up, I think, next week ourselves. And Mitch, one thing I wanted to ask you, because as someone that does a lot of interviews, you've done hundreds in your career. I've in my life thousands. I've only had one that I lost control of that went completely off the rails, and that was with Johnny Rod from Wasp. Have you ever had one that you just completely lost control of and never quite got back again?
Lost control of, no, because I think I always end up turning it around somehow, but there are some that have been not as good, and for many reasons. Sometimes it's my fault. Sometimes it's the guest's fault. Sometimes I think what you have to remember when you're doing interviews and people do interviews is that you're still human. So if you have a cold, or if you've had a bad day, or if the kids have been nasty to you, or the wife was miserable, or the weather sucks, and you're coming into this interview, you might not be in the proper headspace, and it might just not work out. There are some times where the artist or the artist management, especially on some of the bigger names, they will say, you are not allowed to ask about that. You are not allowed to ask about this. And you'll start the interview, and then the artist starts talking about it, and you're like, oh, Christ, now what do I do? Do I follow up because that's the natural instinct, or do I pull away from this really great conversation we're having because management might now block me from the next 10 artists on their roster? And so you have all these things that go on in your mind. And so the short of it is, I've had, listen, there was one time, and I'll name names here, but not in a mean-spirited, but I was talking to Lita Ford. She was supposed to call at 1:00. At 1:00, she didn't call. So at 1:05, she didn't call. I sent an email saying, where is she? And at 1, and they finally got her on the phone like at 1:40. And she didn't seem to be in a particularly good mood. And she was, I think the right thing would have been maybe for management and the publicist to recognize that and reschedule. But the interview went through. The answers I were getting were very short, very curt, very sort of, and it didn't go as great as it should have been. I don't blame her. I've interviewed her before that, and she was absolutely wonderful. But on that one particular interview, it didn't fly. And it happens. Yeah. And it's not because Lita's a horrible person. She's not. She had a bad day. She had a bad 20 minutes. And, I probably were somewhat to blame, because when you're half an hour late, it screws up the rest of your schedule, because sometimes you have, an interview at 1 and then an interview at 1:30. And now, so I might have been a little more unaccepting. So it happens. I did an interview recently with Blackie Lawless, which was about 4 or 5 episodes ago. And if you listen to it, he was absolutely wonderful and charming and gave answers to questions and expanded on. But I did one probably around the Neon God days, I guess, so 2004 or 5. And he was just awful. Mm-hmm. And you know what? I walked away thinking, oh, Blackie Lawless is awful, but maybe Blackie had a bad day. Maybe he had a car crash. Maybe he got the news that a family member was, I don't know. So it does happen. And when it does happen, you just have to remember that it's once, give it a second shot, move on. Not everything's going to be great. You look at a hockey player or a baseball player, they play 80 games in baseball. There's going to be 4 or 5 stinkers during that summer, And so you just have to accept it. And, what you really need to remember is you have to stay professional. You cannot get to social media and say, I just interviewed Blackie and he was an asshole, because that makes you the asshole, and you can't do that. You just have to say, okay, for whatever reason, it didn't work. Maybe it'll work next time, and we'll move on. And it happens. And you look at Blackie. I interviewed him. Go back on the Westwood One network and listen to the Blackie. He was great. He was absolutely great. So, what is it? Is he always great, or is he always the asshole from 2004? I don't know, right?
Yeah.
But you have to give it a second chance, and it does happen. It's like anything. What, you're in Kansas City, you said, or down in
Kansas City. Yep.
Yeah. So you followed the Kansas City Chiefs every so often. Yeah. Every so often, the quarterback throws a few long passes, and the Chiefs win, and other times it's a bloody nightmare. But it happens.
Well, that's a tough metaphor for me, as it's been a bloody nightmare since 1970 when the team last won the Super Bowl. But Mitch, I definitely appreciate the reference nonetheless.
Listen, as a Washington fan, I'm not in a better place to talk. It's been what, 91, 92? Yeah, but
yeah, 92. We just gave you our quarterback, though, so we'll have that connection, for the next few years. That's great, man. But Mitch, I wish we had more time, because I could talk music with you all day, my friend. I can't thank you enough for.
Give me a couple more questions.
Oh, absolutely. Well, as I was going to mention, for my Johnny Rod deal, it went off the rails because he was in a drug-induced state. That's what happened to mine, and it was my most listened to interview of all time because it was insane. And so it was definitely not a matter of anyone having a bad day, just maybe a few too many. And I'm cutting this part out. This is just off the record, but it was a crazy one though. That was a crazy win, and it's funny that you had a Blackie Lawless who he talked a lot about. So I love the Blackie Lawless win. And random, talking about Wasp as we bring it in here. This is a band that hasn't toured America since 2004. Do you think that there's still a chance, because I think Blackie may have burned some bridges with promoters through that Neon God tour, although I did see it here in Columbia, Missouri, that they could bring that back to the U.S.? Does Wasp have any interest in doing that, do you think?
When I asked him about it in the interview, I got the sense, and go back and listen to the tape and get your own sense, but I got a sense that he would like to come here. And it's hard for a band like Wasp to tour North America because the market is somewhat splintered. Most of the bands that tour at his level are on festivals, and to get a Wasp show on a festival is a bit difficult because you've got to have that special stage for the microphone setup that he likes to be on. And to see a Wasp show at 6 o'clock in Missouri when the sun's right in your eyes is not an ideal condition to see a Wasp show. So I would love to see it happen. I think that he wants to make it happen. I do think that at some point we will see it happen, but I think the conditions aren't there yet for promoter meets stage requirements.
So great to catch up with Mitch Lafon, and just for one day and one day only, I went one-on-one with Mitch Lafon. I know the show now is called Rock Talk with Mitch Lafon, and be sure to check out everything he does. It was a great conversation. Really appreciated him doing that. And we just two similar guys, two similar stories, really. I'm just someone that was always loved music going back to when I was a kid, and I saw Kiss's Destroyer album in my grandparents' basement that had belonged to my uncle, and it just kind of set forth a rock and roll odyssey for me. And kind of same for Mitch. He's been around a long time and done this at a very high level, and I respect him a lot. So appreciate him joining us, guys. The live shows are just starting. You heard, if you've heard this show before, you know that I'm adamant about seeing live shows and going to see bands because we're in a crucial stage right now. Who are you going to go see in 2025? These bands are, they're getting older, retiring. There's unfortunately been members passing away the last couple years from bands, and we want to go out and support them and see these guys while they're still here. And that's what it's about. The music is what drives this podcast, and we look forward to bringing you a lot of great coverage as the summer goes on. Looking forward to some interviews coming up. Can't quite say what they are yet, but it's going to be exciting. It's going to be really good stuff. We appreciate you listening here. Always appreciate you pressing the subscribe button on iTunes or YouTube and following us on Twitter at musicmania_show. Got an idea for a show? Want to send in a concert review? Got an idea for a guest? Hit us up. Always feel free to do so, and we appreciate that, guys. This is Clint Switzer from the Music Mania Podcast. We look forward to seeing you next week.